Well, welcome to MathDoctor.net. This is video number 201, where we're going to talk about some very basic concepts in geometry that are covered in the dreaded Common Core standards for sixth grade math. And what we're going to talk about today is mostly some definitions of some words, because the actual material that you're going to be covering in geometry in sixth grade, in fact, even as you move on into geometry in high school, is pretty simple stuff that you already knew, stuff that you knew ever since kindergarten. There's nothing really new that you're going to learn, but you're going to learn a lot of different new terminology to refer to things. Some of them are very common terms that you already know, but some of those very common terms that you already know are used a little bit differently. So we're going to jump right in and talk about the definitions of some of the terms. A point is simply any point in space. So right here, I'm pointing to that point on your screen. Right here, I'm pointing to that point on your screen. Here, I'm pointing to that point on your screen. Point does mean what it really means in the real world. It just means one point in space. So one spot on the surface of the Earth or in the air or in outer space is called a point. And when we draw a picture of what a point looks like, we usually just make a little dot like that. And that's how we know we're talking about that point. And we usually call it by a capital letter. So I'm going to call that point A. And what I'm going to do is draw some other points here. I'll draw point B, and I'll draw point C. And those are just points, point A and point B. The next concept that we're going to learn about is the concept of a line. Well, you know what a line is, but here's one case where the actual definition that your teacher is using is a little bit different from the one that you've always thought of as a line. Because I drew that right there. I drew a line from A to B. That's what you think of when you think of a line, right? Well, your teacher is talking about something slightly different when he or she says line, because anytime you say line in geometry, that means that the line has to keep going on forever. Well, I don't have enough lead in my pencil to draw a line that goes on forever. So when we draw a picture of that, I drew a line from A to B, but as you see, I put arrows going off of each end, showing that that goes off forever. So up here, that extends into outer space forever. And down here, it extends down to the center of the Earth and keeps going off into outer space in the other direction. That is line AB. So that's the definition of the word line. Anytime your teacher uses the word line, that means it goes on forever. It doesn't mean what you think of as a line. What you think of as a line, that thing that I drew originally, and I'll draw another one here. I'll draw what you think of as a line between A and C. We instead call that a line segment. So the thing that I just drew between point A and point C, that's called a line segment, or sometimes just a segment. I'll draw another one here I'll pick two new points. I'll make point D and I'll make point E. And that thing that I drew between D and E, I didn't quite hit it there at the end, but that thing that I drew between D and E is called a line segment, also known as a segment. Another word that you'll use sometimes is called a ray. So as you see here, I have a line going through A and B. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase this arrowhead down at the bottom. And so it doesn't go down to the center of the Earth anymore. But up at the top, you see that it does continue going on into outer space. It starts at point B, it goes through point A, and it goes out into outer space. That is called a ray. A ray is really half of a line because I chopped off half of the line. So a ray starts at one point and extends off to infinity in the other direction. Now, sometimes we want to talk about things like this, and we want to be able to write them down. Well, I could write something like, that line segment I just drew. I could write something like that. I could write out line segment AC, but that's a lot of extra writing. So what I do instead is we have little abbreviations. and symbols that we use for doing that. So instead of writing out line segment AC, I just write AC and put a little line segment symbol above it. That's how we write line segment AC. So if you have a test question and your teacher asks you, please write down the name of the line segment that you see right here, that's exactly how you would write it. You would write AC with a little line, well, not a line segment up above it. That's how you would write line segment AC. That original line that we had, over here, the original line that we had went from A to B and off in infinity both directions. The way you would write that is you would write line AB. So you could write out the word line AB, or you could do it like it is here. You just write AB with a line symbol above it. So you have AB with a line with arrows on both ends. That means we're talking about a line because it's infinity long, called AB. It just means that it passes through point A and it passes through point B. And because you're a bright student, you notice that, well, you could start at A and go to B, or you could start at B and go to A. Those two are exactly the same thing. Line AB is exactly the same as line BA. A ray means you start at one point, you start at point D, you go through point E, and you keep going off to infinity. That is a ray. Well, the way we write ray is we write DE with a ray symbol above it. And that is an arrow, but it only has an arrowhead on one end. That means we started at point D, we went through point E, and we kept going off into infinity. Now, for a line or a line segment, you can put the letters in any order you want, because no matter where you start, it goes off into infinity. But a ray, you can't do that. Ray DE is not the same thing as ray ED. Those are two different rays. One starts at D, goes through E, and heads up to infinity. ED, though, starts at E, passes through D, and then continues down to infinity. So those two are not the same thing. So if the answer is DE, ray DE, and you wrote ray ED, well, that's the wrong answer to that, because you have the ray going off in the other direction. So that's the definition of ray, a line, a point, a line segment. We also have something called an angle. So up here on our first example, well, you know what an angle is. This thing right here, where you start at C, go up to A, and come down to B, that's an angle. And you know what an angle is. That just means where two lines come together. But we should really say where two line segments come together, or it could be, though, where two lines come together. Anytime you have two straight things coming together at a point, well, then you're going to form an angle. And here we can call this angle, the names we can call it. We could just call it angle A, because that pointy part, the pointy part of the angle, oh, wait a minute. Your teacher probably doesn't want you to say pointy part of an angle. Probably wants you to use the official term, and the official term is the vertex of an angle. So right here, point A is the vertex of that angle. Well, we could call that angle, we could just call it angle A, because that's where the vertex is, and we'd probably know which one we were talking about. But what we might want to do, just to make sure that everybody knows exactly what angle we're talking about, is use three of those letters. So we can call that angle angle B, A, C, because we start at B, go up to A, and come down to C. That is angle BAC, or we could call it, it's exactly the same angle if we started over here. We started at point C, we go up to A, and we come down to B. So we could call that angle BAC, or we could call it angle CAB. We can't call it angle ABC, though, because that's a different angle. Because if we called it ABC, that means we started here, came down here, and then turned to the vertex. So that vertex, the pointy part of the angle, always needs to be the middle letter anytime you call the angle. So, and how do you write that down? Well, you write an angle symbol you write an angle symbol followed by those letters. So we can call it angle BAC, or we can call it angle CAB, or we can just call it angle A. And we have that written down here, the different names we can call that one angle. There are different kinds of angles. And the words that you need to know that your teacher is going to expect you to learn are right angle, acute angle, obtuse angle, and straight angle. That's all very easy concept, and you know what we're talking about as soon as I explain it. You just need to know what that terminology is. Now I have a number here written here. We'll talk about that number in a minute. But a right angle, this is a picture of a right angle that I'm pointing at, which just means a square corner. The corner of a square is a right angle, and that's what it's called. It's called a right angle. It's sometimes called a 90-degree angle. And we'll explain why it's called that in a little while, because we could call it other things. We could pick a different number, and I'll tell you what some of those different numbers are. But we call that a right angle. This is an acute angle, A-C-U-T-E, acute angle. Now, what is an acute angle? What does the word acute mean? Well, you probably know what the word acute means because you're a smart kid, right? People sometimes tell you that you're smart. They tell you that you're very sharp. Sometimes they tell you that you are very acute because you figured something out. Well, acute just means sharp. When you're talking about smart people like you, an acute person just means a sharp person. You're sharp because you're smart. You're acute because you're smart. Well, in the world of angles, the word acute means exactly the same thing. It means a sharp angle. So right here, this angle that I'm pointing at, that is an acute angle because it is sharp. And specifically, it's sharper than a right angle. So an acute angle means that it's a sharp angle, means that it's less than 90 degrees. We'll talk about what those degrees mean in a little minute. But an acute angle means that it's less than 90 degrees, but it really just means, just like the word means, it means that the angle is sharp. And here we have a sharp angle, which means that it's less than 90 degrees, which means that it's an acute angle. An obtuse angle. You have some kid in your class who's not as smart as you are, right? Well, that kid is not very sharp, is he? In fact, sometimes you might say about him that he is kind of obtuse. He doesn't quite get things. Well, in the angle world, it's exactly the same thing. An obtuse angle is an angle that is not very sharp. And that means, so here is an angle that is not very sharp. This is an obtuse angle. An obtuse angle is an angle that is not very sharp, just like that obtuse kid in your class. And an obtuse angle means that it's more obtuse, it's obtuser, it's duller than this angle, which means that it's greater than 90 degrees. So a right angle means 90 degrees, means a square corner. An acute angle means sharp, less than 90 degrees. An obtuse angle means that it's greater than 90 degrees or not very sharp, just like that obtuse kid. And finally, a straight angle. Well, if you keep opening up this angle more and more, eventually it'll turn into a straight line. But as you can see, that's not a straight line. It's actually a straight line with a dot in the middle, meaning that the angle, as you go across there, is 180 degrees. So a straight angle, it's pretty obvious that it's a straight line, but that equals exactly 180 degrees. Now, what do these degrees mean? Well, we have to call them something, and somewhere in the ancient past, they decided we're going to measure angles by degrees, and we just kind of decided that 90 is kind of the starting point, and 90 is a right angle, or the square corner of the building you're sitting in, unless the carpenter was not a very competent carpenter. That just means a square corner, 90 degrees. Anything less than that is acute. Anything greater than that is obtuse. If you keep going all the way to a straight line, then that's 180 degrees. Now, we don't need to use degrees. Sometimes we use different things. And I don't think you're going to cover this in class. But just so that you know, you could measure it in percent. So you have a hill. You want to know how steep that hill is. Well, sometimes you say that it's a 50% slope. And in that case, this would be a 100% slope. So we might say 100% instead of 90 degrees. That's another way we could do it. Another way we could do it is we could say, let's say we have an angle here. Then you have we have this angle here because we have a piece up there that's 1 inch long, and we have a piece along the side that's 1 inch tall. And we can, what we can do is we can measure. We can draw a little part of a circle around the edge of it, and we can measure how long that circle is. Well, if we got out a ruler, we would figure out that that was about 1.7 inches. And if we measure angles that way, we would say that this angle is 1.7 radians. Well, and you don't need to know that for class, but what you will discover is that that 1.7 is actually the number pi divided by 2. So sometimes in science you'll use radians to measure an angle, and in this case the angle would be pi divided by 2 radians, or equal to about 1.7 or 1.66 or something like that. So like I say, you don't need to know that. What you need to know for your 6th grade math, for those dreaded Common Core standards, is that that's a 90-degree angle. But now you're a little bit smarter than those other Common Core kids, because we know that we can measure those angles as a percent or in radians. So that's why when you get out your TI-30 calculator, and you can you notice that there's a setting for grads and for radians. Well, that's what those are talking about. But when you get out your TI-30 calculator for 6th grade, leave it set on degrees, because everything that you're going to be doing is measuring things in degrees. Well, a few other terms that you need to know are, so we know right, acute, obtuse, and straight. A right angle is a 90-degree angle in a square corner. An acute angle is a sharp angle, less than 90 degrees. An obtuse one is not very sharp, just like that obtuse kid in your class. It's more than 90 degrees, all the way on up to a straight angle, which is 180 degrees. Two other words we need to know are adjacent angles. Adjacent, what does the word adjacent mean? It just means right next to. So two angles are adjacent if they are right next to each other. Well, yeah, maybe you'll get partial credit if you write down on your test right next to, but your teacher probably wants something a little bit more scientific sounding.